I live in West Virginia in a rather secluded part of the state, so I'm surrounded by trees and wilderness. I have lived here all my life and have heard many stories about Mothman and other cryptids like Skinwalkers and Wendigos. Being one of the oldest among my siblings, I dismissed these folk tales for years, but I was soon proven wrong. In the following days, I would be terrified, fearing for my life, as I was stalked by something supernatural. When I was 17, I was home alone for a good portion of my summer vacation. As it was getting late, I began turning off all the lights in our farmhouse. While doing this, I happened to look out the window toward the tree line. There, I saw what looked like a pair of glowing eyes. I took off my glasses, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. It seemed like I was imagining things, but little did I know I wasn't. That thing would soon become the bane of my existence. The next morning, I woke up and went about my usual routine. I checked the barn, the cattle, and the horses. To my surprise, a few cows were missing. I told myself I must have miscounted the day before, but something else caught my attention. Some of the fencing near the cows was broken. I noticed tracks leading in and out of the pen, but they didn't belong to any animal I recognized, and I know my tracks. I figured it was a mix of cow, coyote, and wolf prints. Out of curiosity, I followed the tracks as far as I could, which led me about 50 feet into the woods. As I ventured into the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I looked around, but all I saw were trees. I told myself I was just tired and headed back to the farm. I quickly put up some temporary fencing with chicken wire to hold until my family returned. Later that evening, after a rough argument with my girlfriend, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I grabbed my phone, plugged in my headphones, and listened to music as I walked deeper into the woods. As night fell, I realized I had wandered too far and couldn't recognize my surroundings. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to guide my way back. While making my way back, my flashlight briefly caught something in the trees. It looked similar to what I had seen the night before, but it disappeared before I could get a closer look. Even though I was 17, I was freaked out. I quickened my pace, trying to leave the woods as fast as I could. Suddenly, a loud howling noise pierced through my music. Startled, I paused the music and took out my headphones. The howl came again. It was deep, scratchy, and nothing like a wolf or coyote. It was like someone trying to yell with a sore throat. I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, shining my flashlight through the trees, but saw nothing. Everything was eerily silent. Then, a twig snapped just 10 feet away. That was when my fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose flight. I ran as fast as I could, despite not being very athletic. Fear gripped me, and my mind raced. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the edge of the forest and the farmhouse, still lit from the lights I hadn't turned off. As I jumped over the fence, I made the mistake of glancing back. To my horror, I saw a pair of glowing eyes. They were higher than any humans, and they were locked on me. I stumbled backward, tripping as I tried to keep eye contact with whatever it was. It didn't come any closer, stopping just at the tree line, but I could smell it. The stench was putrid, like a mix of rotting flesh and sulfur. I knew I wasn't the only one who saw or smelled the creature because the cows were panicking. After calming them down, I returned to the farmhouse, turned off the lights, and grabbed my binoculars. Looking back toward the tree line, I hoped what I had seen wasn't real, but there it was, those glowing eyes staring back at me. My heart leaped into my throat. I stumbled backward, slammed the door, and locked it. I rushed to my room, grabbed the shotgun from my closet, loaded it, and placed it under my bed for peace of mind. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of the roosters and my alarm. I went through my routine, but this time I took my shotgun with me. When I reached the broken part of the fence, I noticed the temporary wire I had put up was torn, and blood stained the ground, probably from one of the cows it had taken. I still didn't know what I had seen, but I knew I would soon face it again. I ventured into the tree line about 10 feet and yelled, "I do not fear you. You cannot hurt me." My voice was firm, but in response, it let out a blood-curdling screech. I turned and ran back to the farm without looking back, a mistake I would regret that night. As night fell, I locked every door and window, then hid in my room with my shotgun. For about 10 minutes, there was silence. Then, I saw it closer this time, maybe 30 or 40 feet from the farmhouse. I knew it had seen me because we locked eyes. I quickly ducked down, and when I looked again, it was even closer and just 10 or 20 feet away. I opened the window and yelled at it, trying to show I wasn't afraid. It didn't move, just stared. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and pulled the curtains closed. Hours passed, or so it seemed, before I heard a loud banging on the front door. It wasn't just the door. There were noises all around me. Screeches, bangs, and inhuman sounds echoed through the house. Suddenly, every window downstairs shattered at once. In that moment, I thought, this is how I die. What happened next still feels like a dream. I heard animal-like noises coming from downstairs, the same blood-curdling howls and screeches. Then there were hoofsteps racing up the stairs. The smell hit me again, that same putrid stench of rotting flesh and eggs left in the sun. I nearly threw up. I covered my mouth, trying to stifle my breathing, but it didn't matter. It had my scent. It found the room I was in. It banged against the door, and I ran to hold it shut, dropping my shotgun in the process. Kept banging and scratching, screaming with rage. I pushed with all my strength, but then I saw the dresser. I managed to shove it against the door, buying myself a little time, though I knew it wouldn't be enough. With my mind racing and heart pounding, I considered my options. Jump out of the third-story window or fight. I chose to fight. I waited, and when it finally burst through the door, I aimed my shotgun at its grotesque face. It was a horrific mix of human and deer, with antlers about 3 feet long. I pulled the trigger. I racked the shotgun and fired again, over and over. It howled in pain, and eventually, it retreated, leaving a trail of blood. I chased it down the stairs, through the hole it had made in my door, and into the tree line, firing my pistol at its retreating form. I stopped at the edge of the forest, yelling that I wasn't afraid. It howled one last time, not in anger, but in defeat. As I returned to the farmhouse, the rain began to fall. Strangely, nothing in the house was broken except for the door. When my parents returned the next day, I told them I had caused the hole in the door in a fit of rage. They believed me and I got yelled at, but I knew I had kept them safe from whatever that creature was. That was 2 years ago, back when I still lived on the farm. I've since moved out and am now attending college, but I stay in touch with my family. I always ask if they've seen any unusual tracks or heard any strange noises. To this day, I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for me to return, seeking revenge for what I did those years ago. I grew up in the Huron region of Ontario, which, for those unfamiliar, is about a 3-hour drive directly west of Toronto, situated along the shore of Lake Huron. It's not far from where the infamous tales of the Black Donnellys took place, for those interested in dark history. While I was in high school, there was a teacher who often shared his experiences from a small, forested area called Lobbs Bush. At the time, I wasn't too familiar with it, but many locals knew it as a haunted place where people had unexplainable, yet eerily similar, encounters. What made this teacher's stories even more intriguing was his firm belief that he didn't believe in the paranormal. He would tell us what happened, but always concluded with, "I don't believe it, can't explain it, I'm just telling you what happened." A few years later, in the winter of 2017, after having graduated from high school and started my first year of university, I came back to my hometown during winter break to visit family and reconnect with friends. If you've experienced small-town life, you'll know that one of the typical pastimes for teens like us was to stock up on cheap reservation cigarettes, hop into a beat-up car, and drive around smoking, chatting, and listening to terrible music until either the gas tank or our supply of smokes ran out. Most of us were between 16 and 18 years old at the time, so this was the most exciting way we could think to spend our time. On this particular break, I was thrilled to see my friends again after a few months away at university. After a few hours of driving around, catching up, and enjoying the freedom from schoolwork, we decided to stop at a random bush trail so some of us could smoke weed. As we walked down the trail, I started to feel a shift in the atmosphere. I didn't want to ruin the mood, so I kept my thoughts to myself, but I felt a sense of unease, as if something was watching us and didn't want us there. I couldn't shake the feeling and kept glancing over my shoulder, checking to make sure we weren't being followed. The trail was surrounded by new trees that curled overhead, creating the impression that we were walking into the mouth of a giant creature. We only made it a few hundred meters down the trail when we noticed that the calm night was quickly turning into a winter storm. Agreeing that we should head back before the weather worsened, we retraced our steps toward the car. By the time we got there, the wind was howling, and the snow made it difficult to see even a few feet ahead. We piled into the car and started driving toward the nearest town, intending to wait out the storm at a friend's place. However, as the snow continued to fall heavily, we misjudged a turn and slid into a ditch. After some back-and-forth frustrations and half-hearted attempts at getting the car out, we ended up stuck for 5 hours before local police rescued us. During that time in the ditch, I finally mentioned the unsettling feeling I'd had while walking in the woods. Surprisingly, everyone else admitted they'd felt the same but hadn't spoken up. Then our friend, who had been driving and was familiar with the area, casually revealed that we had been walking through Lob's Bush. Fast forward to the following year, during my second semester reading week, I was back home with my friends. We decided to revisit Lob's Bush, as none of us had returned since our misadventure. The weather was warmer and the night was clear, with the moon illuminating our path. This time, as we walked, I recognized some of the landmarks I'd missed the first time. Without the oppressive snow and wind, the forest felt much less intimidating, and I began to enjoy the walk, chatting and laughing with my friends. After a while, we came to a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a field bathed in moonlight. On one side of the trail, a small stream cut through the grass, creating a peaceful, almost picturesque scene. We found a spot to stop, and as we were settling in, one friend suddenly pulled out a Roman candle and decided it would be fun to set it off. As the fireworks shot into the air, they pointed it in various directions, sending sparks flying across the field and toward the woods. The shots were mostly harmless, but one of them ricocheted into the woods, and within seconds, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the darkness. We all froze, unsure of what we had just heard. The scream lasted an unnervingly long time, rising in pitch and volume. It was unlike any animal I'd ever heard, a deep, primal roar that rattled my chest. As soon as the scream stopped, one of my friends yelled for us to run, and we bolted toward the field. We didn't stop running until the scream started again, this time even louder and angrier. Whatever it was moving toward us and fast. We ran as hard as we could, eventually breaking through the woods and into the open field. The scream cut off abruptly as we reached the edge of the forest. Shaken but relieved to be out of the bush, we made our way back to the car, too unnerved to speak much about what had just happened. Once we got back to the road and saw the car in the distance, we finally began to relax. We piled into the car, started the engine, and were just about to pull away when one of my friends in the front seat screamed for the driver to go. Without hesitation, the driver reversed and sped off. As we drove past the woods, I glanced back, and for a moment, I saw two large, reflective eyes staring back at me from the darkness. They were set far enough into the woods that I couldn't make out the figure behind them, but I could tell that whatever it was far larger than a human. The sight of those eyes shook me to my core. I felt like prey, and whatever was watching us was the predator. It knew we were there, and it had been watching us the whole time. Later that night, once we had calmed down, we talked about the experience. We all heard the same screams, felt the same sense of dread, and two of us had seen the eyes. None of us could explain what had happened, but we all agreed that it was something beyond our understanding. After that night, I spent a long time researching what we might have encountered. I eventually came to believe it was something akin to a Skinwalker, a shape-shifting entity from indigenous folklore. I shared the story with a few indigenous elders I knew, and they all agreed that it sounded like a Skinwalker. Hearing similar stories from them only confirmed what I had felt in those woods, that there are things out there we can't explain, things that defy logic or reason. That night in Lob's Bush changed the way I think about the world. It opened my mind to possibilities I'd never considered and made me question everything I thought I knew about the supernatural. I don't have any family and I'm socially awkward, so every Christmas, I stay at a cabin I own just outside Robert Lee, Texas. I usually spend 2 weeks there every Christmas because I can't stand all the festive nonsense that's everywhere. Last year was no different. It's important to note that I'd never had a coyote problem while staying at the cabin, though I was always faintly aware they were around. My Labrador usually alerts me if they come too close, but it doesn't happen often since they tend to keep their distance. Anyway, I was staying at the cabin and had been there for a few days. I'd been having trouble with work and was looking forward to the time away from everything. On the third night, Turing started barking to go out. Thinking he needed to go to the bathroom, I let him out. After a brief few minutes, he came back whimpering, as if something had scared him. If you know my dog, you'd know he isn't the type to get scared easily. He's the kind of dog that would try to pick a fight with the coyotes, so this was unexpected and surprising. Stupidly, I stepped onto the cabin porch to see if anything was outside. At first, I didn't see anything, until I noticed 2 glowing eyes staring right at me. I just stood there, trying to focus on what it was, when it stepped out of the darkness into the light. It looked like a coyote, but its skin appeared to be rotting. Then the smell hit me, and I nearly threw up. My body seemed to move back on its own. I backed into the cabin, closed the door, and locked it. I shut the blinds on all the windows and turned most of the lights off. I would occasionally glance out the window, and the coyote was still there. It stayed there the entire night. By the time the coyote disappeared during the day, I had almost forgotten about it. The day went by normally. I drove into town to pick up a few supplies and spent the day relaxing with a few beers. Other than occasionally feeling like I was being watched, everything seemed normal. But when night fell, that's when the real incident happened. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I was woken up by a scratching sound at my window. At first, I was confused. There weren't any trees close enough to scratch my bedroom window, so I immediately knew something was wrong. I got up to investigate. I opened the curtains and screamed. Standing on the other side was the same coyote, but this time, it had a disturbingly human smile on its face. I ran out of the room and grabbed my hunting rifle from the gun cabinet. After checking it was loaded, I looked out the door window and saw several coyotes, all with the same rotting skin as the one from the night before. Then I heard the glass in the bedroom break. I rushed over, expecting to find the coyote inside, but instead, there was a rock. That didn't make any sense. Since when did coyotes start throwing rocks? And that's when I heard it. Laughter. The coyotes were laughing at me. The rest of the night was more of the same. They'd throw rocks, I'd fire a few shots, and they'd laugh at me. As soon as morning came, they left, almost like they had never been there. I packed up and left as soon as I could. I haven't been back since. I sold the cabin a few months ago, and I'm planning to spend this Christmas with my girlfriend's family. I don't think I'll ever forget that laughter. Several years ago, just before COVID hit, I had a strange encounter with what I believe was a skinwalker. At the time, I had decided to buy an old ranch to fix up and eventually retire to. I'm only 32 now, so I've still got many years before retirement, but I wanted to start early. The house on the land was in terrible shape, having been neglected for decades. It needed to be rebuilt, but that didn't bother me. I wanted to build something more modern and planned for it to be completely off-grid. My first night on the property was spent in an old RV I had rented from my parents. I sat outside as the sun set, sipping on some lukewarm beer while watching the stars. Throughout the day and most of the night, I heard coyotes in the distance, somewhere north of my land. I didn't think much of it. If they got too close, I figured I could just head into the RV until they moved along. I was armed, but I didn't see the need to waste ammunition unless absolutely necessary. Things took a strange turn when I heard a blood-curdling screech coming from the direction of the coyotes. It was a sound that's hard to describe, something that seemed to pierce right through me, almost as if it came straight from the depths of hell. It sent a shiver down my spine, and I decided to head inside and call it a night. Just as I was about to settle in, I heard knocking on the side of the RV. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else out here. My nearest neighbor was 6 kilometers away. The knocking continued, moving to the door, and it sounded like someone was knocking normally, as though asking to come in. Somehow, I knew that opening the door would be a mistake, that if I did, I might disappear. I quietly grabbed my shotgun and made sure it was loaded. When I looked out the window, there was no one there, yet the knocking persisted. Then, I started hearing someone or something whispering my name, telling me to let them in over and over again. I kept peeking out the windows and caught glimpses of something moving just beyond the light. Sometimes it seemed like a person standing on 2 legs. Other times it looked like an animal darting around on 4 legs. I was confused, trying to rationalize it as someone playing a prank with their dog, but it didn't explain the whispering. Then, the knocking came again, louder this time, and when I checked, there was something standing there. It was about 8 feet tall, completely black, with glowing red eyes that exuded pure malice. It stared right at me, repeating the same phrases over and over. "Let me inside. Let me help you." And you seem lost. But in a jumbled, eerie way. I was paralyzed with fear for what felt like an eternity. But finally, I raised my shotgun and fired through the door window. Whatever it was didn't seem bothered. It just kept repeating, "Let me help you." I aimed my shotgun again, but before I could fire a second shot, it turned and walked away. As soon as it was out of sight, I heard the most horrifying, deafening screech that I'll never forget. I spent the rest of the night awake, clutching my shotgun in one hand and a bottle of Jack Daniels in the other. The next morning, I did a perimeter check around the RV. Strangely, there were no tracks from whatever I had seen. I found coyote and human tracks, but nothing that matched what I had encountered. Couldn't have been either of those. Since then, I built the house and haven't had another encounter, something I'm grateful for every day.